Dayton's radio home for Buckeyes football. 1410 WING, Dayton's ESPN radio. The Justin Kinner Show, right here on 1410 ESPN radio.
All right, everybody, we welcome you in live here on a Thursday, the Justin Kinner Show, presented by Frickers. Frickers, your home for fun, food, sports, and spirits. All right, we got a ton to dive into. It's been a busy week, of course. You had the Bengals on Monday Night Football, the Cincinnati Reds in the playoffs, or they were in the playoffs. We'll get to that. The Guardians still, rolling in the playoffs. We'll talk about that coming up here shortly as well. Ohio State, Victoria, which is wild that we have not spent as much time in Ohio State as we usually do. That's how busy of a sports week it has been. But nonetheless, we have a ton to get into, and we'll kick off the show like we do every Thursday with the voice of the Buckeyes, Mr. Paul Keels. Mr. Keels, welcome in, sir. How are you? Happy Thursday.
I'm good. How you doing, Justin?
I'm very busy, and that's a good thing. There's a lot going on, and especially in the world of sports. And, Ohio State and yourself, you just got back from your first road trip of the season.
Well, and it was an impressive win for Ohio State, especially the way they played defensively, especially with the way they were able to kind of shut down a Washington offense that had been rolling in high gear. So anytime a win comes about, it's a good one, and there's probably a little added value when it's away from home.
Look, we know how good this defense is. We've talked about it every week that you've come on, but I mean, are there certain points where even you're kind of blown away at just how good this defense has been, considering the pieces that they lost from a season ago? Are you even surprised at how good this defense has been?
In some ways. And Justin, I think the biggest thing, if you look at that last game, Washington was averaging over 50 points a game. Now, take into consideration who they were playing. That's part of it. But when you watch the film of their, had recorded their previous game, you saw how dangerous their quarterback, Damon Williams, was both running and throwing the football. You saw how dangerous with their key people at receiver and running back could be. For this defense to shut them down the way they did and to get the pass pressure on them the way they did in concert with the way the secondary covered their receivers, very impressive. And, to go on the road and do that and really kind of nullify a loud crowd was impressive with what they did. But, look at what they've done with the previous opponents, too. Yes, it was Ohio University, no disrespect meant. And, yes, it was Grambling State, but they also held Texas to a single touchdown. So there have been some points that really have made you feel that this defense has the ability to play at a very, very high level.
I was intrigued by that matchup just for a lot of reasons. Obviously, even with as good as the defense has been, obviously new quarterback, although not that new, we're a few weeks into the season, but it was his first road game, first Big Ten game. Just your overall evaluation of how Julian Sayin looked in his first road Big Ten game.
Well, like we've talked, he continues to look comfortable back there. Things didn't seem to rattle him when they didn't go well. And I think the fact that maybe the new thing we saw last Saturday that we hadn't seen in the previous three games, his ability to use his mobility to keep plays going. He had one crucial scramble where he got downfield, didn't get the first down, but he made a shorter field goal proposition for Ohio State. And just being able to see him move laterally, move around to keep plays open, to allow receivers to come open. With all of the other things that we've talked about, his quick release, his seeming accuracy, and getting the ball to the playmaker. So I think it was just another step in seeing a young man become more comfortable at a high-profile position.
Yeah, and to do that, I mean, look, it was 7-3 at halftime. You're on the road. That environment was unbelievable, as you mentioned a little bit ago. The cool part about that matchup as well, very solid opponent. They had a lot of weapons on the offensive side of the ball for the defense, but another learning opportunity for Julian Sayin, playing a close game on the road, Big Ten opponent. That's something that he's going to see a lot of moving forward this year and next year as the Buckeyes quarterback, of course.
Well, and the way Ryan Day and the other coaches and people have talked about, there was no panic on that sideline when things weren't going well, when it was a tight score, like you said, when they had the fumble on the punt return, which looked like it was going to be a very good return. The situation that cropped up with some of the penalties that got in their way, a fourth down stop early on in the football game. There didn't seem to be any panic with this football team and no feeling that they weren't going to win the football game. So you never know for sure until a team runs into some adversity. They did there. No major adversity, fortunately, but they were able to overcome those things and continue to play well. And, you never know how decisive that game could have been if some of those things didn't happen. But, that's part of what a football team has to deal with, and they dealt with it well.
Paul Keels, voice of the Buckeyes, with us here again, the Justin Kinner Show, presented by Frickers. Ohio State victorious last Saturday over Washington on the road. Their Big Ten opener, of course. Now their second Big Ten matchup coming up this Saturday night at the Shoe, a night game, 7:30, the kickoff, and we'll have pregame coverage beginning at 6 right here with Paul Keels, of course, on 1410 ESPN Radio. But, Paul, now they welcome in Minnesota to the Shoe for a 7:30 kickoff on Saturday night. So 1-0 in the Big Ten, Ohio State and Minnesota. They're coming off their Big Ten opener with the win over Rutgers as well. What have you seen on Minnesota, and what do you anticipate in this matchup?
Well, they were fortunate to get that win. Rutgers had some uncharacteristic special teams problems, a blocked field goal, a missed field goal. But what you saw from Minnesota in that game is Drake Lindsey, their quarterback, really exerted himself with connecting to receivers and throwing the ball downfield. And they had to, because their rushing game has been in trouble. Their top 2 rushers have been out with injury. Don't know what their status is moving forward. I believe they rushed for under 40 yards in that football game. But a quarterback who's shown the ability to get the ball all around to tight ends, to receivers, and to running backs as well. Defensively, they've got one of the most intriguing players, a safety by the name of Coy Parrish, who also returns kicks for him and at times is used as a gadget wide receiver. He's a guy that was a freshman All-American last year and exploded onto the scene with the way he played. So it's a team that's very physical, comes in playing hard. You never really know for sure about a team like that, especially given the fact that they've got some injuries at running back position. But it's a football team that's coming off a win, and that makes them dangerous.
Yeah, again, Ohio State back at home, coming up on Saturday, and then on the road for 3 of the next 4 weeks, of course, at Illinois, at Wisconsin, the big one with Penn State on November 1st, and then at Purdue. Got a lot of home games early, which we're used to, of course, but this is an interesting little chunk right here, 3 of the next 4 on the road.
Yeah, and the only home game of the month of October. So, it's certainly going to be a challenge when you look at what they've had to do on the road. There's a stat out there, Justin. I don't know that I have it exact, but this will be the 3rd time that Ryan Day's had an Ohio State team that's had to play 3 or 4 on the road in the conference, and I believe they've been unbeaten in all of those stretches in the previous year. So, they know what it takes, and this last week was a perfect example of how to take care of their business physically, mentally, all of that, to go away from home and be able to play. The good thing for Ohio State, and it was true in Seattle last week, there's always a noticeable representation of Buckeye fans in attendance. You certainly believe that that's going to be the case both at Illinois and Wisconsin when that happens. But there's no question they're looking at taking advantage of being able to play at home.
Learned a new term this past Saturday. We don't get that around here. Sailgating, not tailgating, but sailgating. Did you and Skip get a chance to sailgate before the game this past Saturday?
No, we did not. But I got to tell you, and having been at that stadium before and having seen it, it certainly was a beautiful sight to see again. The open end of the Washington Stadium opens up to Lake Washington, where people come up on boats and park them there and sailgate rather than tailgate. It is just one of the most scenic settings at a college football stadium that I've ever been at. I know there were some Ohio State fans that were able to take advantage of it, but and the good thing also, from what we were told by a lot of the locals, that was probably the last weekend they were going to have summer-like nice weather, because, as you know, it gets kind of rainy and overcast in Seattle for much of the fall, rolling into whatever winter they have. But sailgating was very much on point and very strong out there Saturday.
All right, Paul Keels, voice of the Buckeyes. Just a couple big games in the Big Ten that we'll be keeping an eye on this weekend. Paul, Michigan back at it, noon kickoff. They welcome in Wisconsin. Michigan the favorite in that one, but they're looking to keep it rolling. 3-1, number 20 in the country. They got Wisconsin coming to town.
Yeah, and Wisconsin and Luke Fickell need a big win. It's been a struggle for the Badgers and Coach Fickell, who's very highly thought of, as you can imagine, around here. And, I think people still are not sure what to make out of Michigan. We know that Bryce Underwood is very talented. Certainly their top 2 running backs are very talented. Defensively, they still have some, not all of the key pieces from last year. So this will be another significant test to see how well Michigan has retooled. But, boy, Wisconsin is badly, badly in need of a big win.
We thought Ohio State was going to have a top 10 showdown with Illinois here, in just over a week, of course, but that's not going to be the case. But Illinois is still in the top 25. They're going to be on the road taking on Purdue. Illinois, a 9.5-point favorite. That's another noon kickoff coming up. But I thought Illinois did a pretty good job bouncing back after getting blown out by Indiana. The way that they bounced back and got a win over USC, I thought that was a very good, mentally tough showing from Illinois after that tough loss against Indiana.
No question. And the hind whipping they took at Indiana really surprised a lot of people. Not that they lost, but that they lost the way that they did. Now, they've had some injury that played a part into the Indiana game, and I don't know where that is going forward, but that was a nice recovery, you're right. And, assuming they're able to take care of things against Purdue that's still going to be a big game. That'll be the first time that Ryan Day has ever coached against Illinois. They were supposed to play there in 2020, but that was one of the games canceled by the pandemic. And just the crazy way the Big Ten schedule works, Ohio State has not seen Illinois since Ryan Day has been the head coach. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. Brett Bielema has done an outstanding job getting that Illinois program back to where they probably still can be in a position, depending on what happens in some games, to be a contender for a playoff spot.
All right, Penn State. I mean, we talked about Illinois coming off of a tough loss 2 weeks ago. Penn State coming off of a tough loss against Oregon. There's no shame in losing to Oregon, but that's definitely a win and just a resume type of thing that Penn State really needed. They're still one of the favorites, of course, but there's a lot of doubt that they could win enough consistently at big games, and to lose a big game the way they did just reminds me of last year at this time with the narrative that was surrounding Ryan Day and Ohio State. Tough loss for Penn State, but they got to turn around. They're going to go play a team that's not very good in UCLA, but it's more about Penn State and who they are coming out than who they're playing at this point.
Yeah, probably a good matchup for them to go out and face UCLA, given the difficulty that they're going through. But, the thing that maybe is getting lost in all of that, Justin, is the way Penn State played to come back and get that game into overtime. You saw some of the skill and the ability they have that people thought before the season could make them a national contending type of team. But it just has added to all of the discussion about they can't win a big game under James Franklin. Obviously a lot of the criticism going to their quarterback, Drew Aller. But, they still have a lot of things in front of them, and they can follow somewhat of a roadmap that Ohio State followed last year.
All right, well, good stuff. Every Thursday, the voice of the Buckeyes, Paul Keels, gives us some time. We recap the previous week's game, preview the upcoming game, and as well some of the top headlines around college football and the Big Ten, of course. You can catch Paul Keels this Saturday night, 6 o'clock. Pregame coverage begins with the 7:30 kickoff. Ohio State welcoming in Minnesota for their second Big Ten contest of the season. Paul, thank you so much as always. Can't wait to hear you on the call on Saturday, and we'll talk to you next Thursday.
Sounds good, Justin. Take care.
All right, good stuff. Paul Keels, voice of the Buckeyes. It's the Justin Kinner Show right here on 1410 ESPN Radio. We have a ton to get into. As the headline for those online, it said, Paul Keels kicks off the show, and the Reds are, kicked out of the playoffs. I mean, they played 162 games. They took us on quite the roller coaster to get us to get super excited for 2 more games. Oof. All right, Reds fans, let's dive into it. They get knocked out in 2 against the Dodgers. We'll talk all things Reds when we come back. The offseason is officially here. Coming up next. All right, and we are back. I'm Justin Kinner with you here, Dayton's ESPN Radio, 1410 Wing AM. Shout out to the voice of the Buckeyes, Paul Keels, for giving us some time and kicking the show off with us like he does every Thursday. Just a reminder, Ohio State, Minnesota, coming up this Saturday night. Ohio State back at home before they hit the road for 3 of the next 4. Look, I saw a lot of Buckeye fans kind of complaining about, the schedule. I mean, the Big Ten's out to, the Buckeye fans crack me up. The Big Ten's always out to get them. The Big Ten's not out to get the Buckeyes. Why? That doesn't make any sense. Do you think Alabama ever says, man, the SEC's out to get us? Why would the SEC be out to get their cash cow? Why would the Big Ten be out to get their cash cow? The reason people are saying that is because Ohio State has to go on the road for 3 the next 4 weeks and 4 the last 6, but they also spent the entire month of September at home. So, yeah, to guess technically they were at Washington this past Saturday, but like the first 4 weeks, it was all buys. August, the first 4 weeks of the season, all home games and then a bye week. And that's if I'm being nice and not considering Grambling State a bye week, because it was, in Ohio a bye week because it was, but nonetheless. So we'll get back into some Ohio State stuff coming up around the corner, because, we're talking about Ohio State and the room for them to grow and how good that defense has been. But I don't really know if there's any other teams that are better than Ohio State right now. And that's not me being a homer. Last year, everyone thought Ohio State was one of the best teams in the country, and I had my doubts, so I wasn't being called a homer then. I think they're the best team in the country, not just because they have the number 1 in front of their name. Like, I don't really know anybody that is as well-rounded as them, maybe outside of Oregon, but we'll get to that coming up later on. All right, the Cincinnati Reds. Look, we knew it was going to be a challenge. We knew it was going to be tough. We knew that they were going to have their work cut out for them. They're going up against obviously the number 1 team in baseball, maybe not record wise and all that stuff, but obviously, payroll, when you look at what they spent and the superstars on it's one of the best lineups in the history of baseball. I always say this, I didn't grow up during the era of the Big Red Machine, obviously, but can you imagine from the Pete Roses to the Joe Morgans, all right, to the Johnny Benches? Like, when I think about the names that just were up and down that lineup for the Reds, I'm thinking like, man, I don't think we'll ever see a Reds lineup like that again. And I really mean that. I don't think there'll ever be a lineup like that ever again in Cincinnati. They're definitely, that lineup exists today. That line, when you look at Shohei Ohtani, right, and you go to Mookie Betts, and then you go to Freddie Freeman, and you just look at the names up and down that lineup, it is insane what the Reds had to go up against. And this isn't all poor Reds thing. This is what the Phillies have to go up against. This is what the Yankees had to go up against last year. And that's just the nature of this, and then they go and add Blake Snell in the offseason. They added Shohei Ohtani last offseason. Like, this is what they do. They were tough to beat 2 years ago without Shohei Ohtani, and now you take the arguably maybe the best player ever in the history of baseball in Shohei Ohtani, and I don't think that's that crazy to say at this point when you look at how dominant of a hitter he is and how dominant of a pitcher he is. And you look at the depth, the fact that the Dodgers got to screw around and say, you know what, Shohei Ohtani, he should pitch game 1 of the wild card round, but we're going to look past the Reds and save him for the Phillies. They have the depth to do that. Can you imagine if the Reds had the depth to say, all right, we have Hunter Green, but let's save Hunter Green for game 1 of the divisional round. Let's just throw out Littell in game 1 and see what happens. Like, imagine having that kind of depth. And that's what led to last night. A lot of people questioning Terry Francona, and I still see it today. Terry Francona, by the way, the Reds would not even be sniffing the postseason if it wasn't for Terry Francona, and I see people ripping him all up and down the social media timeline. And, if it's on the social media timeline, they speak for everybody. No, they just speak more than everybody. You could be critical of Terry Francona. There's a difference between being critical of Terry Francona and then literally talking about him as if the Reds just have a horrible manager. You could be critical. But what you can't do is sit there and act like Terry Francona doesn't deserve to be the manager of this team. The Reds are very lucky to have him as the manager. Let's just get that over with. I don't need to have a repeat segment. You guys know where I stand on that. I think it's crazy that anybody out there is trying to push Terry Francona out. Like, that's the thing that cracks me up. Nobody gave the Reds a chance against the Dodgers. Reds fans didn't. I thought we had a shot because of the pitching. But we all knew they didn't have a shot. And then when they proved that they didn't have a shot, now we're pissed off. You guys don't make any sense. Like, had the Dodgers lost that and Dodgers fans are mad, I would get it. There's talks of Aaron Boone potentially losing his job with the Yankees if they don't beat the Red Sox this series, because they just always seem to get there. They just always seem to come up short, which is wild because they were just in the World Series a year ago, but that's besides the point. But like, if they do decide to go with the managerial change with Aaron Boone because they fall short again, and this time in the wild card round with all the money that they've spent on that roster, I get it. They had expectations. Let's be clear, the Reds didn't. But Justin, to look at the lineups he put out there, you don't have to. You're not the manager. He is. I don't agree with some of the lineups or the pitching decisions that he uses, but every time, to Terry Francona's credit, he doesn't challenge the media. He comes out and he explains it. He does give an explanation for every decision that he makes. And I think that guy knows way more about baseball than me and you. So what I was critical, what I was worried about coming in was, we know how good this pitching staff is, and yet we know how good Andrew Abbott is, and yet we're going to potentially see the Reds make the playoffs and not even see their second best pitcher pitch at all. I mean, Andrew Abbott. We didn't see Andrew Abbott. All right. We got to see a little of Nick Lodolo and Chase Burns, Tony Santillan, Emilio Pagan. I mean, like, a lot of these guys. I mean, I saw someone joke earlier today on social media that, man, give Terry Francona a lot of credit. He's thinking ahead. He wanted to make sure that these guys are as well rested for opening day next March, as possible. That's why he opted not to use them. But that's just the crazy thing. You play 162 games to get to the point to where your season could be done in 2 games, and that's what happened here. The Reds go down 8-4, game 2 of the wild card series against the Dodgers. They take a 2-0 lead. They had their opportunities down the stretch. Like, let's be clear. I don't even know if this was a David versus Goliath type situation. Like, the Reds had one of the best pitching staffs in baseball. You can't say it's David versus Goliath when you actually have one of the best weapons possible to go at the Dodgers. There was a lot of reports that were coming out that the Reds and that Hunter Green was tipping his pitches, and it wasn't just Hunter Green; it was every pitcher in that game 1 against the Dodgers, which would make sense because why would Hunter Green, who's just been lights out all season, maybe you could say that the nerves got the best of him, but he's been pitching in high leverage moments all season. He's been his best all this past month, the past month of September, where all the pressure on the world is on those final starts. You only get a handful of starts in a month, and he had to maximize those starts because if he didn't have a good outing, the Reds needed those wins, and he performed lights out. I don't know if the moment was too bright for him or not. He didn't seem like the moments were too big for him in the buildup to these playoffs, and they definitely don't make it if it wasn't for how he pitched against teams like the Mets, the Padres, and others. Tipping his pitches. My only problem was, why didn't, if people in the Dodgers clubhouse and dugout could notice it, why couldn't people in the Reds? I do have a problem with that. But overall, everyone complaining about Terry Francona and the Reds, you guys all gave them 0% chance of winning this series. You didn't think they were good enough. Then when they proved that they weren't good enough to beat the Dodgers, what did you guys do? What the hell happened? What's wrong with Terry Francona? I can't believe the Reds couldn't do this, this, and this. You all knew that they weren't good enough to beat the Dodgers. I didn't consider it a David versus Goliath type situation because I thought the Reds had the number one tool to go at the Dodgers, to try to neutralize them, and that's pitching. And I said if they can't win with Hunter Green on the mound, they have no chance of winning this series whatsoever. And not only did they not win with Hunter Green on the mound, they got waxed with Hunter Green on the mound. They put up 2 in the first inning last night. They looked more locked in. They looked comfortable at the plate, which I thought was a huge thing, especially going up against a quality pitcher like the Dodgers had on the mound last night. But the dagger, of course, when they left the bases loaded, when you had the middle of the core, the heart of your lineup up. Elly De La Cruz strikes out with the bases loaded. You had the heart of your lineup with the bases loaded, no outs, and an opportunity to get back into it, to take the lead, to take control, to force a game 3. Every other team that lost game 1 of their playoff series won yesterday to force a game 3 today. There's 3 game 3s today. There should be 4. The Reds couldn't get it done. But I'm not going to sit here and act like, oh man, the Reds, the Reds had their opportunities. You had Hunter Green ready to go. Keep in mind, what if down the stretch you desperately needed to win a game that Hunter Green had to be thrown on Saturday to where he wouldn't have been available at all to go against the Dodgers? The stars were aligning to put the Reds in position to do this. You had Hunter Green in this pitching staff to go at the Dodgers. It just didn't work. All right? You had opportunities down the stretch where, like I said, if you would have just righted the ship a little bit to get through the Dodgers starters, They have one of the worst bullpens in baseball. They made it. They have one of the best closers, but they have one of the worst bullpens. And we saw it again last night. The Reds had a chance last night to chip away at it. Once they went to the bullpen 2 nights ago, that game should have been over with early, and it felt like it, and it was, but they went to the bullpen, and the Reds started rallying late. They put up those 5 runs. They rallied late. Too little, too late, but they rallied late. You had the Dodgers' bad bullpen, your great starting pitching. All right, the fact that you played them in a shortened series, some of your worst hitters got hot. Your best hitters went cold. If your worst hitters that got hot complemented your best hitters, while your starting pitching would have contributed the way it should have, you know what I mean? Like in a short series, the Reds had every opportunity possible. They squandered it. I don't feel bad for them, but I'm not mad at them either. You cannot sit there. You spent all week telling me the Reds have no shot. I've followed everything on social media, not just mine, but across the board. Everyone didn't give the Reds a shot, Reds fans included. And then when the Reds lose, you guys are angry because you were right? I don't get it. Terry Francona, he lost in that series. I can't believe he did this, this, and this. What are we doing? You guys know damn well that he was not given the strongest roster in the world. And he somehow found a way to take that roster with all its deficiencies and lead him to the playoffs. But he's the problem. Look at the problems on this roster up and down. There's a lot of strengths. I love the pitching. I love select players there. I love the Sal Stewart. I love the development of him. Ellie De La Cruz wasn't great this year, but even him not great is still a very, very good player, right? Like we saw a major comeback this year, by multiple key players. Spencer Steer, as bad as he was to start the season with how banged up he was, to me, it was just great to see the way that he, bounced back throughout the season and became one of the best defensive first basemen in all of baseball. And yet we were still trying to find ways to force somebody who doesn't play first base to play first base. We were forcing guys to play left field that don't play left field. We were just moving guys all over the place because nobody fits. The Reds have a roster full of guys that just don't fit. They have guys that could contribute, but they just don't fit. I like Spencer Steer. Is he your first baseman? I mean, he's a great defensive first baseman. When he's healthy, he can hit the ball. That complements the other side of the infield at third base with Ke'Bryan Hayes, who's not a very good hitter, but the best defensive third baseman in baseball. That's a great compliment there. Matt McClain's a solid defensive second baseman, but I mean, is he the hitter that he was his rookie season or the hitter that he was last year or 2 years ago, whatever? I mean, I don't know. What do you do with this Reds, roster, with this lineup? We're going to talk about that more coming up in a moment. But there's a lot of positives to take away from this season. I'm not going to sit here and act like this was a horrible thing. Noelvi Marte, the growth of him. The emergence of Sal Stewart. We know Ellie's a star. Ellie's going to get some of this stuff ironed out. I heard people say, is it really time to start talking about the development of Ellie De La Cruz? I'm not worried. I'm not there yet. I'm bummed that he went 0 for 3 last night, with 2 strikeouts. I do have a problem with that. He did draw a walk, but I have a problem with that. He's their star player. He needs to show up. But this is the first time that any of these young stars were on this stage. And the fact that Sal Stewart was responsible for all 3 runs last night, good for him. Defensively, the Reds took a hit last night, which was what my concern. That's what Sean and I talked about yesterday. I said, hey, if you want your offense, you're going to become a liability at defense. If you want your defense, you're not going to be able to have your best pop in the lineup. It's frustrating, but that's what we saw. I'm not angry that the Reds lost yesterday. I'm just not. I was bummed, but I'm not angry. Good for them. They found a way to make the playoffs. They found a way to get there. They found a way to fight. And that's all you can ask for at this point. Now, let's say the Reds go out and have a huge offseason and they add legitimate dudes to this roster. And then a year from now, when there really is expectations and they fall flat in the playoffs, then we can talk about Terry Francona. Has the game passed him by? Then we could talk about Ellie De La Cruz, who can't use the fact that this was his first playoff appearance in his young career. Oh, maybe the nerves got to him. Then we could start to be a little bit more critical and hold him to a higher standard. I think it was tough for a young roster like this, 0 playoff experience whatsoever, going up on the road against a team that has talent galore up and down that lineup, the defending World Series champions. I'm not going to hold Ellie De La Cruz to the Mookie Betts standard in the playoffs, who, by the way, Mookie Betts struggled most of the regular season, popped off come playoff time. Those guys have the experience. They've been there. He's won multiple World Series with multiple teams. You know what I mean? Like, that lineup has guys who have been there before, who have won it. The Reds don't have that. They don't have that luxury. They have guys that we hope can lead the Reds there at some point. But you got to start somewhere. And Ellie De La Cruz, Sal Stewart, right? You look up and down, Hunter Green even. This was their first playoff appearance from the Matt McClains, to the, you go up and down. You just continue to look at Noelvi Marte, all these young guys, first playoff appearance. But a year from now, they make better roster decisions in the offseason, fingers crossed. Then I think you could start to be a little bit more critical as far as who showed up and who didn't. All right. With that being said, that's my final takeaway on what we saw just over the last couple of days. It was cool to talk about the Reds in the playoffs. I've been working radio for 10 years. Again, I told you I don't count 2020. That was my first real opportunity to get to talk about the Reds in the postseason. It was fun. That feeling was fun. Brian Weaver says David versus Goliath in payroll. Oh, no doubt, David versus Goliath in payroll comparison. But the thing about, I do think money matters, but it doesn't. Look at the Mets. Now, I know that's a simplistic response to that, Brian. Like, I'm not going to say, see, the Reds don't, I don't want the Reds to spend $300 million because, look, the Mets did. They didn't even make the playoffs. Trust me, I'd rather miss the playoffs spending $300 million than miss the playoffs by not spending $300 million, because at least the Mets went down trying. I saw that the owner of the Mets, and this is a conversation. I have this in my topics for later, like next week sometime, once we kind of get out of this a bit. I don't know if you guys saw it, but the owner and Cohen, the owner of the Mets, came out and apologized. The only time we hear from our ownership, the Reds ownership, is when they're mocking us, basically saying, hey, we know we're cheap. We know we don't want to spend a lot of money. We know we're not very good, but where are you going to go? The only time we hear from our ownership is when they mock us. I see Mets fans ripping Cohen and everything else, and I'm like, guys, your owner, he gives a damn. He puts his money where his mouth is, and then when they came up short, he apologized. Like, he wants it as bad as you. Do you ever feel like your ownership wants it as bad as you do? I feel like Cohen wants it as bad as Mets fans do. Good for him. And I thought that was very classy of him to put out that apology. I thought that was very cool. I would the reason that you don't get those apologies from Reds ownership is because they can't actually apologize and feel and mean it. They can't apologize, because to apologize, you have to truly feel like you did everything to put a winner out on the field. Cohen did. He spent $300 million. He went out and got Juan Soto. He already has Francisco Lindor. Look at all the guys in that rotation. Look at the guys in that lineup. Like, he spends, and then spends more. And then when he comes up short, he doesn't sit there and blame the players. He said, hey, we messed up. Our bad. We're going to do everything we can to get back to the playoffs. I love that. Reds ownership won't do that, because they have not put their best foot forward to try to do everything possible to put a contender out on that field. I think the Reds won on accident this year. That's why I was annoyed with Jim Day and others who were saying, oh, no, the Reds didn't backdoor their way in. They most definitely did. The Cowboy last night in the broadcast said it himself, like, hey, the Reds have to have a big offseason coming up, because in a normal year, you're not going to make the playoffs winning 83 games. The Reds finished above 500. They had a winning record against winning teams. We saw the emergence of stars in this lineup, not up and down, but as far as the young players, like, I'm excited about the future of Sal Stewart and Ellie De La Cruz, right? Like, and I love that Noelvi Marte just looks the part, and he took major strides. I love Cabrian Hayes defensively. Like, now we're starting to see a core of guys that we're going to feel good about in this lineup. Spencer Steer, is he here next year? But he's a great contributor. I love what he does defensively. And then you look at that rotation. You look at the fact that Chase Burns emerged and lived up to the hype. You already have Hunter Green. You have Nick Lodolo, Andrew Abbott, the strides he took this year to be, he's contending with Hunter Green as who the best pitcher is in this rotation. It's still Hunter Green, but that's how good Andrew Abbott has been, because it's always from the beginning been Hunter Green and Nick Lodolo. We've just paired them up as a 1-2 combo in this rotation. I think it's Hunter Green and Andrew Abbott, then Nick Lodolo. Chase Burns is going to rival Andrew Abbott for the number 2 spot. That's how talented and deep this rotation is. And let's not forget that, Rhett Lauder, he's still floating around out there a little bit too. So there's a lot to feel good about this team coming out of this season. I would not I'm disappointed in how the venom that's being spewed from Reds fans on social media right now. It's just kind of crazy. Ron Howard, the series should show you how far away the Reds are from competing, not close. I don't think they're far from competing at all. You know how hard it is to make the playoffs? If this was the worst roster that Terry Francona has moving forward and they still made the playoffs, that's what I'm hanging my hat on right there. Brian Fraley says Francona gambled and lost. So many things had to go the Reds' way for them to win, and none of them did. That's the thing. That's why I'm not anti-Francona. He had to gamble. No matter, the team was so average that you cannot throw out. You can't just follow the rule book. It's easy to be Brian Roberts with that Dodgers lineup. You could be aggressive because if you fail, don't worry. There's enough pop in that lineup to overcome it. If they would have thrown Shohei, all right, in game 1, and he would have got rocked 3 innings in, don't worry. They have enough firepower in that lineup to make up for it. The Reds were done the second that Hunter Green gave up that home run to Shohei Ohtani because they just didn't have enough firepower to combat it. Francona, everything he did was a gamble. He justified every decision. I don't think any decision he made was wrong. His decisions were viewed as wrong based on the flaws that the team had around the decisions he made. But if he doesn't make those current decisions, then he pays for it elsewhere. We talked about it on yesterday's show. People were pissed off at the lineup. How do you not have Sal Stewart in the lineup yesterday in the game 1, if you will? I'm like, well, you're going up against the Dodgers. You need to be as locked in defensively as much as possible. And are you going to put Sal Stewart at first base over Spencer Steer? Well, yeah, he's a better hitter. Well, we've seen how bad this team could be defensively. So they may score a couple more runs than they usually do, but they're going to give up a lot more runs. Well, it didn't matter because Hunter Green got shellacked, but it was the right decision. Every decision that Francona made was justified. But every decision he made also had a counter to it that, yeah, but now you've opened the door to this because the team had flaws and deficiencies. There was no bulletproof decision that he could have made when it came to constructing this roster, to putting a lineup out, to who to throw and pitch. I don't know. Fraley says they still had a great season, and I'm glad Francona is at the helm. The whole offseason help get it a few more pieces, to help get them a few more pieces, develop the young players that we have. There's some more positivity. I like that. Lamar Shelley, I don't understand why they pulled Lodolo. He was dealing. I think that's where you start overthinking some of that stuff a little bit. Lodolo, and also some of that's matchup based with him being a lefty as well. That does matter. Lodolo pitched this past Sunday as well, which, again, I'm not a big fan of that. You're in the playoffs, pitch till your arm falls off. But nonetheless, second-guessing everything he does. I'm not going to get on that when it comes to Francona. Brian Weaver says, should be an interesting offseason. Does the ownership go all in and sign a big bopper that they need desperately, or do they continue to play small ball in the smallest, most homer-friendly ballpark in the league? And that's a great question. And that's a perfect segue into the next part, because I want you to pay attention to some of the biggest names in the playoffs right now. Think about the names that we have heard a lot of, all right? Think about the names that we've heard a lot of so far throughout these playoffs. Think about Jazz Chisholm right now for the New York Yankees. Think about, Teoscar Hernandez for the Dodgers. All right. You know how many names there are in these playoffs that are having big series right now that the Reds were this close to getting but opted not to? Let's hope the Reds don't make that mistake again this offseason. Let's talk about the offseason ahead for the Cincinnati Reds and what we want to see from them. We'll get to all of that when we come back. It's the Justin Kinner Show right here on 1410 ESPN Radio.
Justin Kinner Show. Right here on 1410 ESPN Radio.
All right, so the Cincinnati Reds, their playoff streak, their playoff run comes to an end. 2 games against the Dodgers is all it took for their playoff run to come to a close. They get beat 10-5 in Game 1 and 8-4 last night, despite taking a 2-0 lead in Game 1. Yamamoto on the mound for the Dodgers last night. And to the Reds' credit, they jumped on him early, and it was Sal Stewart who we didn't get to see him in the lineup on what night is it? Thursday, on Wednesday night, or Tuesday night when the playoffs started. But we did get to see him last night. He made an impact. He was responsible for the 3 of the first 4 runs that the Reds scored. Just wasn't enough. Obviously, the Reds had opportunities. They had the bases loaded, no outs. You had the heart of your order coming up, and you had key guys strike out, including Elly De La Cruz, which is a problem. But as we sit here right now, I start to look ahead to this offseason. I'm not going to, like I said, I opened up the show. We opened up the show with Paul Keels, but I opened up the Reds talk portion of the show today, basically saying, I'm not going to beat up on Terry Francona. I'm not going to beat up on Elly De La Cruz. All right, we all were. I was excited about the Reds being in. I thought that the Reds had some key components to their roster makeup to maybe challenge the Dodgers in a short series. In a 7-game series, I gave the Reds a 0% chance of winning. In a shortened 3-game series, when you have Hunter Green on the mound in Game 1, anything could have happened. It would have, put the Dodgers in an elimination game situation in Game 2 and 3. I like the Reds' chances at that point. But when he gives up a homer to Shohei Ohtani, bam, right off the bat, and it sets the tone. And, obviously there's reports that come out of him tipping his pitches, not just him, but even the bullpen when they came in. That's why they were getting rocked the way that they were. It's unfortunate, but we got to see the Reds in the playoffs. Elly De La Cruz is a megastar name in baseball that rarely gets talked about or seen in the, under the lights because the Reds have been so bad. Finally got to see him play under the lights. Didn't go great. All right. Obviously, you look at the fact that, you have Matt McClain, who was bad all season. He played well. All right. Hunter Green, unfortunately, did not. We got to see Chase Burns for a little bit. He did get a strikeout in there. This was just it was an appetizer for what I hope is the beginning to the main entree in the coming years. But what the Reds can't do, so I don't know if you guys saw this for those on X. So one of my favorite follows on social media is former Red Zach Cozart. Zach Cozart's one of my, I don't want to say one of my favorite Reds. He's just one of my favorite follows on social media because he's a former player that played in this organization that gets how they operate. Some, obviously good and bad. And he's very optimistic about the Reds and he's very supportive, but he's also very critical of the front office because just like we as fans know, he knows as a player that they don't do everything that they can to put this team in position to go succeed. So Zach Cozart tweeted this out a little bit ago. He said, I am done talking Reds. The last thing I'll say, and the true test for me and what I'm looking for, will the front office just do a victory lap because they made the playoffs? Or will they actually see this window with this pitching and add significant pieces for once? We will see. Now, I'm not going to compare the Reds' wild card appearance to the Bengals making a Super Bowl a few years ago. But I remember having a similar conversation when the Bengals made the Super Bowl years ago, saying, are the Bengals going to look at this and see that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and that defense, with all those guys on rookie deals, just like Zach Cozart's talking about the Reds with this core of pitchers, are they going to look at this and say, well, we got to the Super Bowl with these guys. That's all we need. We're just going to take a victory lap of our Super Bowl appearance and call it a day? Or were they going to look at that and use it as motivation to do everything in their power to not just get back, but to remain in that picture moving forward? And guess what the Bengals front office decided to do? The victory lap. Remember the parade they threw for losing a Super Bowl? That should have been a key sign right there that they were going to milk that Super Bowl appearance for everything that they could, because what did they follow it up with? Beyond bad free agent signings, outside of Orlando Brown Jr., of course, and horrific drafts. They've done nothing to better the team since they made the Super Bowl years ago. I hate to compare a Super Bowl appearance to a wild card appearance for the Reds, but this is the only postseason, proof or evidence that we could work with here when it comes to the Reds. And I agree with Zach Cozart. Are the Reds going to just do a victory lap here because they made the playoffs, or are they going to use this as motivation and see this window with this pitching staff and significant pieces that they have here and try to build on it. Which direction are they going to go? Because that's a great point, and that's exactly what I'm looking for as well. Will they do the victory lap route and then just settle and just go get your Andujar level free agent signings in the offseason, or are they going to close the deal on some of these big names? I bring this up because the Reds flirted with some big names in the offseason. They flirted with some big names at the trade deadline. They fell short on every single one of them. Jeff Brantley said last night in the broadcast, you're not going to make the playoffs in a regular year winning 83 games. Well, what do you mean? They just made the playoffs. You're not going to, you can't, the blueprint cannot be, we're not going to improve our roster. We're just going to count on a team that spent $300 million to implode. That's not a blueprint. That's not a game plan. That's a delusion. That's the Reds being lucky this year. You know what I mean? Do you realize that the Mets win one more game? A team that spent $300 million on their roster, more than double what the Reds did. Do you realize that they win one more game? The Reds don't even make the postseason. So the Cowboys, right. You're not going to make the playoffs in a regular year winning 83 games. So I'm glad they made the playoffs, but use it as motivation. Okay. It's not fair to sit there and compare the Reds roster to the Dodgers. But the one thing I can look at the Dodgers and say is they care, they try. Do the Reds care? Are they going to try? Look at some of the names that the Reds were in on last offseason, or at least, when the Buster Olneys and the MLB insiders were, the Tim Kirksons and others were, according, ESPN's Jeff Passan. Remember when Garrett Crochet was available as a free agent? Remember the Reds were super close to getting a deal done with him? You remember Jazz Chisholm. You remember when the Reds were very close to acquiring him at the last trade deadline. And then they were kicking the tires on signing him in the offseason. Remember that the Reds were a team that was interested in him and that he had conversations with them. Remember when those reports came out? You remember when Teoscar Hernandez, when ESPN's Jeff Passan, I found the tweet today, according to sources, Teoscar Hernandez and the Reds are in conversation on a potential one-year deal. Guess who has had massive wild card rounds already? How about Garrett Crochet with the Red Sox? He's been phenomenal. How about Jazz Chisholm? If it wasn't for him, the Yankees would have been beat already. Jazz Chisholm's been phenomenal. Imagine that freak athlete, defensive player, electric with the bat in his hand. Imagine what the Reds would look like with that in a lineup with obviously a Sal Stewart and an Elly De La Cruz. Imagine if the Reds would have pulled the trigger there. How about the, so Jazz Chisholm to Teoscar Hernandez, which, by the way, the Reds and us, we got a front row seat to the Teoscar Hernandez show. Imagine if the Reds would have pulled the trigger there. Imagine what he would have done in that hitter-friendly ballpark at Great American Ballpark. Imagine what he would have done for the Reds to provide a little bit of pop in that lineup as their backs were against the wall against the Dodgers. Guys, I'm with Zach Cozart on this. Are they going to do a victory lap, or are they going to use this as motivation to get back? Because I'm tired of in the offseason seeing that the Reds' name is linked to a Jazz Chisholm or to a Teoscar Hernandez or to a Garrett Crochet or whoever. I no longer want to hear that the Reds are linked to guys. I need to see the Reds close deals and go get talent and bring them to Cincinnati so that the Reds don't just get to the wild card and get embarrassed. They go to the wild card, or hell, maybe even win the division and enjoy a bye in the first round of the playoffs and get to host playoff games. At least get to the next level where you could disappoint us at home instead of on the road. I mean, come on. It's all about the next level, baby. Come on. But that's all I'm trying to say is at a certain point, you got to pull the trigger on these names. Because it's funny. I was watching that Yankees Red Sox game. I'm hearing the name Garrett Crochet, and I'm like, you got to be kidding me. The Reds were this close to signing him, right? Jazz Chisholm, the Reds were almost traded for him a few years ago when he's with the Marlins. They almost signed him in the offseason. They were this close. Teoscar Hernandez, ESPN's Jeff Passan. I found the tweet. The Reds and Teoscar Hernandez, discussing a deal this close. He ultimately goes to the Dodgers. All right, Jazz Chisholm ultimately ends up with the Yankees. Garrett Crochet goes to not the Reds, the Red Sox. And then here's the Reds, who would have loved to have imagine a Hunter Green and a Garrett Crochet and an Andrew Abbott and a Nick Lodolo and man. At some point, you can't just flirt with the girl. You got to get her number. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just keep flirting. Close the deal, Reds. This is ridiculous. And I hope that they got a good taste of that this offseason. This postseason, just so they could truly experience the talent gap between them and everybody else. It's not fair to compare their roster to the Dodgers, but man, oh man, that was something. All right, I'm Justin Kinner. It's the Justin Kinner Show, 1410 ESPN Radio. We'll have Ohio State talk coming up around the corner. If you missed our conversation with Paul Keels, we have that coming up in hour number 2 as well. But we could stay on this Reds conversation as well, no doubt. But what's next? A huge offseason coming up for the Reds. What should we expect to see from the Reds front office as this goes on? We'll get to all of that when we come back. Again, the Justin Kinner Show, presented by Frickers. Frickers, your home for fun, food, sports, and spirits.
ESPN Radio.
All right, and we are back. I'm Justin Kinner with you here, Dayton's ESPN Radio, 1410 Wing AM. So yesterday, again, there was 4 game twos in the wild card round of the playoffs, and 3 of the 4 game twos were won by the team that previously lost in game 1, forcing 3 game threes today. The only team that couldn't force a game 3 was, of course, our beloved Cincinnati Reds. So no Reds game tonight. That's it. I mean, I guess that's the crazy thing is, like, you know, the game as it was coming to a close last night. I'm watching it, and then it was the final out, and I'm like, and just like that, it's done. We're done. Season's over. Bring on Reds Fest. I'm just kind of curious the direction of what the mood is going to be amongst Reds fans in the offseason. Like, I feel a lot of anger from Reds fans right now, and like, you guys are being weird with this. I'm not going to lie. Why are Reds fans being so just miserable? Like, you guys never seem to. Like, and don't say, hey, we've been through so much over the years and blah, blah, blah. I get that. Most fans feel that way. But I'm looking at it as every reason you say why you're pissed is why you should be happy. Like, this team makes the playoffs, and then it's, yeah, but look how many scoreless inning streak. Look at the scoreless inning streak they had. I get that. That's a talking point, yes. Still frustrating. And I'm not saying just be happy that you're there, but like to let that just totally overcome all your emotion. If I would have told you back in March that before on opening day that we were going to, that we as fans were going to support this team in the playoffs, you would have been ecstatic. You wouldn't have cared how they got there. You would have just been ecstatic. And guess what? They got there. And I felt some excitement. Not me, I was excited, but like I just don't feel like Reds fans truly embraced the Reds making the playoffs this year. It just didn't feel like it. Maybe because some of us were not crazy and we kind of understand that they did backdoor their way in. Okay, that valid, kind of. Maybe that has something to do with it, but like, do you realize like a lot of teams need a lot of luck to get that final wild card spot? The Diamondbacks, remember a few years ago, the Reds missed the playoffs by a game a few years ago. The Diamondbacks finished 1 game ahead of the Reds and took that final wild card spot, and they took it all the way to the World Series. They lost, but they got there. Luck plays a huge role in that. Some good, some bad. The Reds seem to always have more bad luck than good, but without bad luck, they'd have no luck, I guess. I don't know. I'm just blown away at how negative Reds fans have been about this. Like, you could be bummed that they lost, but like, man, I just don't get it. All I know is all my attention is towards this offseason. It is a huge offseason. And I just thought it was very ironic. The names that I've heard a lot of in this postseason. Yes, your Shohei Ohtanis and Mookie Betts and guys like that, but like Teoscar Hernandez crushed the Reds. Teoscar Hernandez crushed the Reds over the last couple of days, right? Like that massive home run that he had back in game 1. I mean, yesterday, again, he goes 1 for 5, brings in 2 RBIs. I mean, Teoscar Hernandez was unbelievable last night. It was great last night and great in game 1. I mean, he was responsible for 2. He was responsible for 2 of their 8 runs last night. And then you look at what he did in game 1. He was 3 for 5. He scored 2 runs, had 4 RBIs. Guys, Teoscar Hernandez was responsible for 6 of the 18 runs that the Dodgers scored on the Reds. So you're probably wondering, Justin, why are you bringing up Teoscar Hernandez so much? Because the Reds were so close to getting Teoscar Hernandez. Teoscar Hernandez should have been a Cincinnati Red. But the Reds didn't want to spend money. Oh, well, you weren't going to outbid the Dodgers. Well, not on every single player, but like Teoscar Hernandez also wasn't super, super expensive. Like, don't tell me that the Reds, who spent $22.5 million on Nick Martinez, couldn't afford, to spend money on Teoscar Hernandez. There's like no way that you could tell me that. So they spent $22.5 million on Nick Martinez. You mean to tell me that the Reds couldn't afford to spend $23.5 million on Teoscar Hernandez? Teoscar Hernandez was massive in the postseason for the Dodgers so far. And the Reds were close to getting him, but they didn't want to spend money. That's the problem with the Reds. They want really good players. They just don't want to pay them. Doesn't work that way. Remember at the trade deadline when Nick Krall came out and said something along the lines of, we we want to get better at the deadline, but we don't want to give up any of our top prospects to do so. Well, I don't think you truly understand how this works, buddy. To get something of value, you have to give up something of value. To get a Teoscar Hernandez, you have to spend money. To get quality pieces at the deadline, you got to give up quality prospects. The Reds refuse to do so. Let's think back to not this past trade deadline, but the previous trade deadline when Jazz Chisholm was available. The Reds were so close to acquiring him, but they didn't want to part ways with some of their top prospects. Look how huge Jazz Chisholm, has been for the Yankees. He's been unbelievable. Jazz Chisholm was, lights out in game one. I know the Yankees fell short in game one, but he played a huge pivotal role last night in the Yankees' game 2 win to force the game 3 at home against Boston. Chisholm wasn't even in the starting lineup, whatever. But that run and those big plays he made defensively, he draws a walk, he finds a way to score a run, makes those big plays defensively. I mean, Jazz Chisholm would have been a phenomenal addition to this Reds lineup. It's just kind of one of those things that's frustrating because the Reds were close to acquiring him. They weren't willing to give up anything of value to get him. And then, of course, my favorite, when you talk about, how everything is kind of shaped up, when you look at the New York Yankees right now and you look at what they had to go up against in game 1 against Boston, the one reason why they could not get anything going against Boston, they put up one run in that 3-1 loss against Boston in game 1 where they ultimately lost at home. Garrett Crochet gave up, he pitched just under 8 innings that game. He gave up 1 run on 4 hits. He struck out 11 batters. He threw 117 pitches. He gave up 1 run on 4 hits in just under 8 innings of play. Now, why is Garrett Crochet such an interesting name? Can you imagine if the Reds had Garrett Crochet on the mound to go up against the Dodgers either in game 1 or last night in game 2? Well, the Reds were this close to signing Garrett Crochet in the offseason. But Garrett Crochet ultimately went to the Red Sox because the Reds did not want to spend money on Garrett Crochet. And that's the problem with the Cincinnati Reds. They want those players. They want his production. And again, I get it. $24 million for Garrett Crochet. Let me ask you. Garrett Crochet was $24 million. Teoscar Hernandez, $23.5 million. All right, forget Jazz Chisholm for a second, but those 2 high-impact players, Teoscar Hernandez, that bat in that ballpark, in that lineup that desperately needed it, there's no price that's too high for me as a Reds owner when it comes to trying to put a competitor out on that field. Garrett Crochet, as dominant as this Reds pitching staff is, can you imagine a rotation for the Reds that features a Hunter Green and an Andrew Abbott, a Nick Lodolo, a Chase Burns, a Garrett Crochet? Garrett Crochet would rival Hunter Green for the top spot in that pitching rotation, and Andrew Abbott was rivaling Hunter Green for that spot. Nick Lodolo is viewed as, the 3rd best pitcher on that, and if he's your 4th pitcher, unbelievable. And then if your every 5th day pitcher is Chase Burns, who in his rookie season, his debut season, had a stretch of games where he struck out 10 or more batters, 4 straight outings. Only a handful of pitchers have done that in the history of baseball as a rookie. Guys, if you want to be taken serious, if you don't want to be a laughing stock, because that's what everyone did, the Reds just got laughed at this entire playoffs. They have to go get impact. To make an impact, you got to get impact guys. Not almost get them. Not almost get a Teoscar Hernandez, who made an impact for the Dodgers in the wild card round. Not almost get a Garrett Crochet, who made an instant, impact for the Red Sox as they beat the Yankees in game 1 on the road. You could win on the road at New York. Imagine what you could have done at, in Los Angeles with Crochet on the mound. I'm just saying, to make an impact, you got to get impact players. And the Reds just don't have enough of those. So I'm hoping this offseason they go get that. Go get those impact guys. And if you're just tuning in and wondering why I'm bringing up these names, the Reds were, according to ESPN's Jeff Passan and others in the offseason, the Reds and Crochet were in deep talks about a contract for him to play in Cincinnati for Terry Francona this year. The Reds just couldn't get the dollars right. You think the Red Sox are regretting the dollars that they spent? No. Look at Teoscar Hernandez. And by the way, bring this up. Teoscar Hernandez, $23.5 million for this year. Garrett Crochet, $24 million for this year. Nick Martinez, $22.5 million for this year. I would have kicked Nick Martinez to the side, and I would have done everything in my power to get one, if not both of those guys, but one of them for sure. When you look at what they were willing to pay Nick Martinez. And there's no way you could tell me that Nick Martinez had more value to this team this year than than the likes of what a Teoscar Hernandez or a Garrett Crochet would have had. So there you go. That's that. All right. I'm Justin Kinner. It's the Justin Kinner Show, 1410 ESPN Radio. 4:15 here in the Miami Valley. We're going to step away for a few moments, and let's talk a little Ohio State football. Ohio State, I loved what I saw this past weekend against Washington. Washington's 3-1. They hadn't played anybody, but they have one of the most electric quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers in all of college football. And I truly believe by the end of the season, there will be a number in front of their name in these rankings. I don't think they're not going to be a playoff team, but that is a heck of a program and a heck of a test for Julian Sayin to go make his debut on the road the way that he did, his road debut, if you will, his Big Ten debut. As a heck of an opponent, and Ohio State's defense just absolutely ate them up. I want to talk about Ohio State. What is are they favored right now? Do you think that they are going to repeat as national champions? I didn't think that was going to be the case coming in after all the talent that they lost. But somehow, some way, outside of Oregon, I don't think there's another team in college football that looks as complete as they do. We'll talk about that when we come back. Plus, if you missed our conversation with the voice of the Buckeyes, Paul Keels, we have that coming up for you around the corner as well. It's the Justin Kinner Show presented by Frickers. Frickers, your home for fun, food, sports, and spirits.